start with reassigning objects. This is something that we introduced, I think at the same time that we introduced customizable workflows. Most of the time, an object will pass through the workflow, and when it gets to the right stage, some group or some people will be expected to work on it. But there are times when you might want to circumvent that, or you might want to supplement it. So you can, from the workflow panel of any object, add collaborators. And so what you can do is you can add users in one of three roles. You can ask them to comment, you can ask them, or you can give them editing privileges, and you can also cede your role entirely, right? So there are occasions, I think, when you want to get a particular individual's feedback, and so you might choose them from the drop-down and ask them to comment and then add a little note. There are times when a particular person has expertise or knowledge about a definition or a specification or any other data cookbook content type, and you would ask them to step in and perform an edit. And then finally, the granting of the role that you have, or if you're an administrator, the role maybe that somebody else has, would allow for some individual who wouldn't normally be able to take some kind of workflow action to step in and do so. You can add as many collaborators to an object as you like. The collaboration adds, it lasts for as long as the object is in the stage where you added the collaborator.
Hey, Aaron, this is Brian throwing my my random comments in. This is something that I highly recommend for people who have sophisticated workflows for part of your organization, but don't for others. And you can basically route certain functional areas or data systems or whatever to like an oversight group, you know, a sort of a leadership group or an admin type of group, as if there was already a role there, and then use the collaborators to pull in a subject matter expert if you don't have someone who's recruited to respond. So that's another feature of this, is to like basically fill in gaps in your assignment mappings to have it go to an oversight group and have them solicit subject matter experts when you don't have a recruited steward yet. This is a really good way to do that. Right. Thank you.
Yes, I think it's a great way to get a particular person's insight that you wouldn't normally get through your workflow setup. Related to that is also the ability to reassign the version creator role. So if you create an object for whatever reason, but you don't need to be responsible for it, that actually removes you from the process and adds someone else. And that is also done from the workflow panel. Instead of clicking on the collaborator link, you actually click on your name or the version creator's name, and then you can replace that around. And that will, I think, will be of interest as we discuss some additional resources that we're introducing in this area as well. This next bit, you can go ahead and advance the slides now, Brenda, is something we introduced very recently. And it's something that people have been interested in for quite some time. This allows you some control over the way that the tabs are labeled inside the Data Cookbook. So across the top, I've got the standard set as of today from the Enterprise Edition. And then at the bottom of the slide, I have just some quick changes to show what is possible. So, we have become aware that the terminology around this work has evolved over time. And so the things that we used several years ago are not as resonant as they used to be. And we're also aware that any given client calls this whatever they call it, based on history or changes in leadership or whatever it might be. So this is something that you do from the organization tab, or in my example down below there, the admin tab. You go into that tab, you choose the settings link, and then you have the ability to rename the tabs. Right now there is a character limit, which is why we don't have maybe as rich an example to offer you as you might desire. The other thing you can do is you can change the name of the browse pages associated. So for example, if I'm going to what is called the browse definitions page, I can change that so that the display here is something like business terminology. And it occurs to me that, so whenever we push a release of the cookbook with new features or defects that we have addressed, we publish in the forum section, which is available under the community tab, a description of the changes that were made. So if this is something that's of interest to you and you didn't know about it, the best way to stay on top of these updates is to go into the forums and to find the forum, it's called Data Cookbook Updates, and make sure to watch that. And that's how you would get notifications like this. All right, and then our final tip or trick of the day is something that a number of clients have already been taking advantage of, but one that I think many of you might be interested in. So, you know, you can import definitions from a file, and many clients will do that at various points in their implementation or their continued usage. But sometimes you just make mistakes. You leave something out, you catastrophically misspell something in multiple places, and so you don't want to go through and you want to change all those individual definitions. But you can simply run the import again. And if you haven't even approved anything, you can simply just override. So that's a useful scenario, particularly when you're new to the cookbook. But there are other things that you might want to do, right? You might have brought a bunch of definitions into the cookbook prior to deciding on the way you were going to do classifications. Or you might realize that a number of definitions went in and they didn't have a source properly attributed. So you can assemble that information in the import file and run the re-import, and you can replace what you already have. And then a couple other pretty common use cases we see are I've got a new technical definition, or I've got a new way of sort of writing the technical definition. So I want to update that in bulk for a lot of things. And this last one, I think, is something that many people will be interested in. This is a way to force the cookbook engine to reassess which workflow a particular definition should be governed by. It's often the case that several hundred definitions will be added to the cookbook prior to you deciding on your final definition approval workflow. And so to get them moved from the default or from an earlier version of the workflow to the one you want, you've got to change the functional area, or you've got to update a data system around the technical definition. But if you re-import them, then that process happens as if they're brand new, and they would end up in the preferred workflow. And then one thing to be aware of when you run this process, and we can go to the next slide and see this, is very much like your original definition import, except the cookbook recognizes that there are duplicates and it gives you these options, right? And so one is, do you want to overwrite the existing definitions? And the other one is, do you want to automatically approve the pending definitions? And you can kind of mix and match when you're around that. If you have a number of definitions that are kind of in a pending state, you probably just want to overwrite and leave them in that state. If you have already made the changes that you want and won't need any additional editing, right? You've got what you want in the import file, then you can go ahead and select the approve option from here. So it's both a way to move definitions around to get them in front of the right people, so to speak, and it's also a way to do some bulk changes to approved objects.